yeah. Welcome in to It's Just Wrestling, your new favorite or 10th favorite pro wrestling podcast. I'm Russ Joy. You can find me on Twitter at JoyOnBroad, and I'm joined by a man who didn't like just living in someone else's house. He went out and built one of his own, and that's Nick Hausman, who you can find on Twitter. He's also the president and the founder of Haus of Wrestling. Nick, thanks for joining me on It's Just Wrestling this week.
My pleasure, Russ. Thank you so much for having me on.
There's a lot to get into this week, and I took a couple-week hiatus here from doing the show on YouTube. And part of that was I finally took vacation with the family for the first time in, I don't know, probably a year. And I almost never take time off from work, but I said this year is going to be the year. I'm going to take 4 kids and all the grandparents and my wife to the beach. That was an experience. It was an extravaganza. It was something. It worked out, though.
That sounds wonderful. That sounds lovely.
And I saw you were at the Pride Parade in Chicago on Sunday, so it looked like you had a heck of a weekend as well.
Yeah, I'm still feeling it. Very much feeling it here today. Catching up on everything. But yeah, no, Pride Parade was yesterday. What a great environment. So happy that we get to do that every year here in Chicago. It was wonderful.
Before we get into things, you're obviously, I wouldn't even say you're a lightning rod, but you were involved in the initial, the before the brawl out at All Out. You happened to be the guy asking the first question, and maybe got railroaded, maybe didn't. I don't know. With CM Punk, wanted to know just at this point, have you been surprised from the time that scrum happened till now at the way things have devolved throughout? Whatever you want to call it, wrestling journalists through other sites. Have you been surprised in how things have gone since that fateful night to where things are now, where as a forbidden door, apparently, it has been reported that the Elite and CM Punk were on opposite sides of the arena. Are you surprised that we're still here at this point and things have gone the way they've gone?
Yes and no. It does seem like the two parties are living in quite different realities, and even still are. Punk was coming out there and was giving his side of, why he thought there were these issues with him and the Elite's camp, right? The whole thing is still rooted in this idea that Punk tried to get Cabana fired or moved to Ring of Honor or something like that, which he has vociferously and repeatedly denied over and over and over again. And even still, we're getting these reports. I think it was coming out of Rampage or Collision on Saturday, where people are still saying, well, I don't care how many times CM Punk says he didn't try to get Cabana fired. I know a guy who knows a guy or two guys that say he did, and therefore grudge still very much in play. It is amazing to me the power Colt Cabana has, I guess, to sway this many people to go to war for him and put their reputations and livelihoods and careers all on the line for his. It's quite something. It's breathtaking in many ways.
To give you a little bit of context here, all right, I was a wrestling fan in the 90s in my childhood and going through the Monday Night Wars. And then I pieced out sometime around in high school. So we'll say like the mid to late 2000s. And then I came back around when Goldberg showed back up in WWE way down the line when he took on Brock Lesnar and squashed him. Like that's when I came back in. And then AEW totally grabbed me because I said, this to me feels the most like what I remember Nitro feeling like, or what the Monday Night Wars kind of felt like, even though it was them going up against NXT, the developmental territory. Like I sat there and I said, all right, this feels cool. Like I'm back in. And initially I thought to myself, like, I don't know how I'm going to be able to get myself invested in a bunch of wrestlers I've never seen before. I've never heard of before. I didn't follow them in ROH. I didn't follow them in New Japan. I had no idea what either of those were. And yet here I am a few years later, and I'm sitting here going, all right, I wasn't a fan when Punk went through ROH and when Punk showed up in WWE. So I have no emotional attachment to Punk. I have no emotional attachment to the Young Bucks. I didn't see them as, what was it, Generation Me? I didn't see that in TNA.
Oh.
I didn't see their ROH stuff. I had no idea who they were. Kenny Omega the same way. I wasn't tuning in to go see, him and Okada in the Tokyo Dome. Like I had none of this. And so to look at it from an outside perspective, as somebody who like truly is, I guess, unbiased in this, because I have no emotional equity in any of these people, I sit back and I go like, what the hell is wrong with these guys? Like, what is it at this point that 9 months later, these guys still can't iron out? Now, I find it interesting. Punk was essentially quiet until, a week or two before Collision was officially announced, where he put up the Instagram story. He had put up the thing about Moxley and like the Rocky 3 ending and all
the
that.
whole Rocky,
where he like eventually kind of like broke his silence. But other than that, like he had sat back, he'd been quiet. And it felt like there was kind of like an elite-driven agenda with Wrestling Observer and with some of those outlets where kind of felt like their side was coming through a lot, but Punk remained quiet. And the second he came back, and this is where I want to take us to, is Collision and his return. It felt like, all right, he went to ESPN right before, the interview goes out right before the first Collision. He addresses things about as much as I guess he can, if we're to believe all this legalese nonsense that's been, written about time and time again.
Sure.
It seems like he handled this the professional way. Again, neutral party here, but it feels like the way that he handled things makes sense. He comes back from injury. He goes that way. Am I crazy? I guess that's my main question here. Like, am I nuts? Am I missing something?
No, you're not missing anything here. It's been an entire the war of attrition has played out in the news cycles, right? It does seem that there are a cadre of people in AEW who want to continue to keep this narrative running that they were wronged and that Punk is this bad guy. And look, Punk is not a perfect individual by any stretch of the imagination. But if you do look back at, all the various questions I was asking leading up to All Out, several months worth, all the reports, Hangman Page kind of calling this guy out in the ring, when you get into a space where you feel like a lot of people are pushing you around and doing so in very public ways, oftentimes those individuals can act out, right? The big thing here that nobody knows really much, if anything, about is what happened in that locker room, right? Like we know that this fight took place by some estimates, like 8-10 minutes, which is a really, really long time for a fight. I don't know if anybody's ever been in a physical fight, but that's a pretty long time.
Very long. It's a long
you got to really want to fight somebody if you're fighting for 8 minutes, right? So it was a very, very physical encounter. CM Punk is a professional fighter. Say what you will about how he has not won really many of his professional fights, but he trains with guys who enjoy getting their asses kicked and kicking asses and all of that kind of thing. So he likes to fight. The Bucks like tennis shoes. I don't know that those entities probably hang out and do the same things and react the same way to that environment. So, again, I think there's the issue. It's all about Cabana for me. It's so weird, but it is, and nobody wants to. It's all about Cabana. That's why this is all going on. It's all Cabana, and they don't want to let the Cabana thing go, and so they're going to keep doing this. And then now this fight has happened, and as long as we don't know who shot first, you can kind of start to posit it however you want. This person wronged me. I was wronged. Nobody can talk about it, so let your speculation run wild, kind of deal. So
I feel weird because I don't make it a habit. And like, this is even on like the pro sports side of things, which is my day job, right? Like covering sports. You try not to totally diminish somebody's accomplishments or where they've gotten in their career and all that, right? Like whenever somebody says like, this guy sucks, right? He got thrown out of third base. He sucks. He's garbage. He shouldn't be in the majors. Or like, this guy missed 3 wide open threes. My team got eliminated from the playoffs. He sucks. It's like, well, no, like there is a certain number of people. There's a finite number of spots on a pro sports roster. And like, you have to be pretty damn good to get there. Maybe you're not going to be the greatest player of all time, but like you have to be at least good at one thing for you to get that call up. So I don't want to say that Colt Cabana sucks, but again, I have no equity. I have no emotional attachment. And what I've seen has only been through the lens of AEW. And what I saw is a guy who was tangentially affiliated with the Dark Order. There was like a flirtation period. Will he, won't he? But at no point did I say, wow, this guy's like blown me out of the water. He's not an athlete like Will Osprey. He doesn't have the look of a Kenny Omega. He's not an in-ring tactician, playing the psychological game like a Punk or like an FTR. And so I go like, I don't know what the one thing that he does particularly well is. And so if we're to follow your line of thinking on this is all about Punk. It goes back to the Hangman promo about workers' rights. What the fuck are we doing here?
Like, even before that, even before the promo, because you got to remember, before the Hangman promo, there were all these other stories that had started to emerge, setting the stage for the Hangman promo, right? The story
Yeah.
had to be out there before that line from Hangman Page even made sense. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So
Sure.
just to kind of, again, further put things in perspective, like, this isn't just like Hangman came out and said this and the whole thing just fired up. It had been going on for at least weeks. I don't remember, maybe months before that.
The way that it seems to have been framed time and time again is, and this is where, and I don't want to put you in a weird spot because you go to these events, you're covering it as a full-time career. So I don't put you in a bad spot. And if I do, feel free to tell me I'm an asshole and we'll pivot.
All right.
But okay. Again, perception. Wrestling Observer does their thing. The Meltzers and the Alvarezes of the world, they do their thing. They seem to be passing along, or have for a few months passed along, something that is I would say, more of a pro-elite than a pro-punk stance. And I don't know if it's malicious. I don't know if I could go so far as to say that it's been malicious, because I don't think that either of those guys want AEW to fail. And the way that AEW, I think, would fail in a lot of ways is if you were to lose a star power guy like a CM Punk because of something like this. But I do wonder if they just don't think about the ramifications of spreading their stories or spreading what's passed along to them without thinking of the bigger picture. And it feels like time and time again, something will go up on their message board. They think gets aggregated and blows up into a big thing. We saw this leading up to, even before Collision was announced. It's like, there's a murmur about this. And then you're like, well, shit, is that going to piss off Punk again? Is he going to walk again? You would hear, things were coming back together, but did this blow it up? And at some point I just go like, are some of these guys just so far into it with personal relationships that they might have with talent, or friendships that they might have with talent, where like they just aren't seeing the forest for the trees? They're putting this stuff out. They're not thinking about how it could impact the business. And ultimately, like, it can do harm to that company. It could do harm to all professional wrestling. Like, again, am I crazy, or is that kind of what we're seeing?
I definitely think there is a little force from the trees mentality here. Absolutely. When it comes to this kind of let's play it out in the sheets mentality, it's a lot of focus on the backstage area, not the focus on the ring where you're supposed to be making money, right? It can turn people off. It's also confusing, right? Nobody wants to draw sides about it. And I do think it has a lot to do with ego, right? I mean, this is a business where, look, you cover sports, right? You go hit the most home runs. You're a big baseball player. They give you a better contract, right? These are quantifiable stats, right? You can just look at the numbers and know if this is somebody I want to invest in. It is pro wrestling is an art form, right? Pro wrestling is a very subjective, objective, whatever you want to say, kind of deal. Everybody sees what they want out of pro wrestling. What is good wrestling? Who is a draw, right? So if the way to have more home runs in this situation than the other guy is to just become more valuable than him, then the politics game of how do I devalue this guy and make myself more valuable come into play. And I think, honestly, this whole situation is a big ol' shoot for the king, you best not miss type situation here, because I think these guys thought they could take Punk out. I think they very much underestimated Phil Brooks, right? And we are seeing on the other side of the chicanery that Punk is getting heavily booed in Canada, right? Yeah. Other places, other markets where this guy who before was a bona fide star and was making you tons of money is now having to, in some places, in some ways, rebuild, which does nothing, right? So yeah. I definitely think that this is an ego type situation. I definitely think that there were some people that really thought they could out leverage CM Punk and push him around and make a point. And I think they just lost. I think so. I think it didn't go their way this time.
Can I tell you something that I thought was laughable in the past week?
Sure.
It actually did make me laugh. It really did. It was after Punk dropped the counterfeit Bucks line at the first Collision.
Yeah.
There was initially a report, and I don't remember which outlet it was, but there was one that said that was viewed as okay, that the Bucks had kind of seen that one coming. They knew that there could be something. And then a few days later, there was another report that was they had no idea. They're even more pissed off. They're even more incensed that he would go and do that. Where I sit back and I go, that's what's going to upset you. Like, that line upsets you? And then I come back to, and I'm sure you remember this, After the Elite came back off of their suspension, I think it was the show in Los Angeles at the Kia Forum. The Bucks mocked Punk screwing up the buckshot lariat. Kenny Omega did a biting spot, bit of forearm, right? That was playing off of the bite at Brawl Out. And I sat back and said, well, if I'm to believe that these guys really don't like each other, they have not resolved their issues, I can't imagine that anybody ran that by CM Punk to see if he'd be fine with them alluding to that. And if there is truly no plan to work things out, to do good business, which is ultimately what this is supposed to be about, and as an EVP, you're in theory supposed to care about is the business, doing the biggest numbers, doing the most revenue, all that. If there was no plan, how the hell do you do that? And how do you think that there's not going to be recourse down the line? Whether it's Tony Khan, who's supposed to do it, who it doesn't appear has provided recourse, or at an eventually returning CM Punk, like, how do you think that that's not going to be met in any way, shape, or form?
It's probably a couple things, right? Like, I think that for a lot of reasons, the Elite probably think that this is their house, right? This is a guy who came into their house, right, and is now trying to, takes. I don't even like. I think they believe that he was in there to take or mold or move or whatever. I don't really know necessarily that was his vibe, from what I've gathered, right? But that's neither here or there. So yeah. I just here. Can we go back? What was your question? I got lost in my thought there for a moment. Sorry.
It was just that they went out in LA. They did the
right.
School buckshot, the bite.
Yeah.
If you're going to do that, how do you not think that eventually somewhere down the line there's going to be something put out there in some way, shape, or form?
Sure. So what I was getting at with my line of thought there was they think they can do whatever they want, right? We can poke you, but you can't poke us because this is our house, right? We built this house. You came in here. And for whatever reason, we don't like you, but you can't do anything about it. So we're allowed to needle you and poke you and say things to the sheets and say things in promos because we're trying break you to be a better I don't know, right? Like, torture never works, right? That's not the way you make people better people, right? So you sit here and you antagonize a guy all the time, right? And you tell him he's terrible and that nobody likes him and nobody likes you and you're a huge cancer and whatever else, blah, 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 blah. Of course he's going to blow up one day, right? And so I think part of what they were trying to do in Chicago with their provocations was I think they wanted to provoke this guy again, maybe, right? They wanted him to get upset, go out there, be crazy CM Punk, and then they could go, look, this guy's an out-of-control maniac. He's obviously the issue here, not us. I just keep going back to the provocation here leading into All Out. It was almost entirely one-sided. By the end of it there in the weeks leading into All Out, people are yelling at Punk about Colt Cabana, right? The guy's visibly lost his mind. Like, it was very third act Macbeth there when he's doing Snow Angels in the ring after calling out Hangman Page. So I just think I think there was a lot of provocation. I think you poke somebody long enough, they're going to react. And that's, what this is.
So you mentioned the idea of, like, did Punk want to come in and, like, change things, mold things? There's this new show, Collision. I haven't done an episode since the first episode of Collision. So I want to get your thoughts. I want to share some thoughts here as well. It feels like a very different show from Dynamite. Aesthetically, it does. The presentation, who's actually on the show, the size of the wrestlers, I think is this to me feels like way back when AEW first started. Tony Khan promised this idea of, like, a sports-based presentation. There seems to be more emphasis on not the records there. They're obviously not emphasizing it the way that they did the first few years of the company, but like Buddy Matthews, they called him Murphy on the thing. Buddy Matthews and Andrade in that first week, they put on a hell of a match. They look like pros. Who was it a few weeks ago? Was it Hogan is the one who said that a lot of wrestlers now look like they should be bagging his groceries. If those dudes are bagging your groceries, you say please, thank you, and leave a tip. Right? Like, those guys looked the part. Miro comes back. He looks the part. It feels like the show that people, I guess, who like that kind of wrestling, I kind of find myself liking Collision more. I like the presentation more. I like what's happening in the ring more. It feels like that's more of what we as that segment of fans were promised way back when. But that's not to diminish what Dynamite is and has been. From your vantage point, are you seeing this decided difference, in terms of presentation, in terms of in-ring, that make Dynamite and Collision feel like almost different companies.
I don't know if I'd go that far. I think they definitely feel like variations of what AEW. I think you're right. I think Collision is probably more akin to what the initial vision of AEW was. Dynamite has kind of become its own unique thing here over the past, 3 years or so. I, when I went to the very first AEW, one of the very first AEW tapings, I'm trying to remember which one it was. It may have been All In. I'm not remember where, but I was sitting next to Bill Apter, and I'll never forget Bill leaning over to me and going, "This all just feels like Vince McMahon's thing with a different coat of paint, right?" It's as much as you want to say, "Oh, this feels like a different brand or different." It's not that different anymore. I think it's probably a little bit more serious. I think it's probably a little bit more focused. I think that there's probably some stuff tightened up around the edges, but I don't think it feels different, but not wholly different to me at the moment.
Do you buy into any of the rumors, I guess, that had come out of the first episode and the second episode that Tony Khan isn't the only one responsible? I mean, there are people who actually believe that he's not booking any of it, which I think is insane, right? Like he's had his hand in everything. But do you look at it and go, there's a good chance that he's actually leaned on some other people in this one, maybe more so than on other shows?
Oh, I definitely think Tony is starting to lean on more people across the board. I don't think that's just with Collision. I think that's with Dynamite. I think that's with Rampage. I think that's with Ring of Honor. I mean, it is as much as he wants to put up a front that he is a Superman that never sleeps and can do all these many, many things at once. It is impossible to think that he's not doing that without a team. And you look at people like Chris Hero, who's been around, and Jimmy Jacobs, who's coming in, on top of all the other great, producers and agents they've amassed over the past couple of years. I think the time has come, and I think Tony knows it, to trust some other people. And with Collision, hearing what they're saying about Danielson and Punk and Ace Steel having some more creative say and control, these are. I don't want to make anybody upset by comparing them to Vince Russo, but the reason that the Attitude Era felt so different was because Vince McMahon was letting other people largely do it, and he was just kind of governing it. And I think that's kind of where we're at with creative in a lot of ways for AEW. There's a lot of talent say, input, and Tony is just kind of governing. I think he's putting a lot of polish on a lot of stuff at the moment. Could be wrong, but I think he is just helping with a lot of polish in a lot of areas at the moment.
Have you had any thoughts on the commentary team on Collision? Kevin Kelly, Nigel McGuinness, like them. I'm not saying you have to, compare them to what we're used to hearing on AEW programming, but your initial takeaway after 2 weeks of those two on the call.
Well, I didn't hear him the first week because I was at Collision the first week. It was in Chicago.
Oh, that's right. Yep.
But I have watched episode 2 of Collision, and I think they're fantastic. I think that they bring this kind of level-headed professionalism. You talk about that sports feel. I mean, these guys sound like the real deal. I believe what I'm watching more because these guys aren't sitting here screaming about Subway sandwiches or something. They're keeping the focus on the action and trying to do it justice.
Yeah, I find the first week I thought that Kevin Kelly was maybe like a little bit. I couldn't tell if it was just because of the audio level or if it was nerves or whatever it was, right? Like, because he's kind of been in some way, I think, waiting for a big break. Like, I know that he's done a lot of work with New Japan, but again, like, you come back to, like, what's the actual English audience for that week in and week out? Right? Like, that's not exactly the same thing as being the lead voice on one of the two biggest promotions in the. It feels like he certainly has risen to that moment. For like week 2, he did a great job. I thought he was excellent at Forbidden Door as well, kind of balancing out Excalibur, and when they had Taz on the call, when they had Tony Schiavone on the call, like he seems to bring that level-headedness. I know that there were a lot of people who wanted more to get brought in, and again, no equity, no emotional equity, wasn't a big NXT follower. I understand the idea of like Mauro as this like, main event announcer, like boxing or MMA, and like really just give it to you, but I don't know if I could do that for 2 hours every week. I think Excalibur in some way kind of does that, whether that's your brand of commentary or not. But I've liked what the Collision broadcast team has brought to the table through 2 weeks. I'm excited about where that's going to be chemistry-wise. By the time people really start coming back in the fall, I always think about the wrestling fandom kind of goes away a little bit in the summer. I think a few months from now.
I love Mauro Ranallo. I would have been fine with him being part of Collision. I just think he might be happier away from pro wrestling at the moment. I know he loves pro wrestling, But, if you've seen his bipolar rock and roller documentary or, really anything about Morrow, that this guy is walking a line pretty much every day of his life. And with as crazy as everything has been in AEW, and look, I'm hoping by the end of the summer, we are looking at a cemetery of buried hatchets, my friend. I really do.
Yeah.
But do you drop a guy like Morrow in that? I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. You got the locker. This is actually, and let me throw this to you. So we're talking about allegedly the Elite and Punk were on opposite sides of the arena at Forbidden Door.
Sure.
Eddie Kingston, leading into Forbidden Door, does an interview with the New York Post, and like Kingston and Punk presumably have had no love loss, right? I think Kingston probably delivered one of the harshest lines to Punk when he initially came back and got in his face in the corner and said, "Nobody wants you here. They never wanted you here." I was like, "Oh shit, that feels like something." He said that he didn't expect Punk to do anything differently in the way that he's returned and everything, and that the people that he rolls with don't have a problem with what Punk has done, but maybe it's just that 1%. Now, I think it's interesting because that All Access show that I tuned in for like 1 or 2 episodes, Kingston went up to the Bucks and said, it feels like home now that you're back. So I have to assume there's a relationship there, and I'm pretty sure that those guys aren't rolling with Punk right now. So do you buy into the Kingston commentary there of the New York Post?
Look, I'll take Eddie at his word. I'm not going to sit here and say Eddie Kingston is talking out both sides of his mouth. If he says it, I'll believe him. I do know that Eddie is very close with people that do not like CM Punk. I mean, look, I where was the Target Center? It was somewhere, some show last year I went to.
Minnesota? Is that Minneapolis?
I think it was Minnesota.
No,
yeah,
that's Target Field. I don't know. Whatever.
It was Milwaukee. It was someplace up. It was like Milwaukee or Minnesota or something like that, I think. But I was staying in the hotel, the Wrestler Hotel, accidentally. I just booked the hotel that was closest to the video. It turned out to be the one all the AEW wrestlers were staying in. And I've never told this story, Russ, but I was heading down. You had to take like an elevator to this level, and then you take another elevator down, and you had to like get a key because everybody was in there to get it. So anyway, I go down the first elevator. I'm going downstairs just to go find a bar, meet up some people. I go down, and there's like a little lobby outside the elevator, and I see Colt Cabana, Eddie Kingston, and I forget whoever else was, but I remember it was Eddie and Colt. And Eddie sees me walking down, and he goes, "Hey, media guy!" And I was like, "Hey!" And I see Cabana grab him and go, Cabana doesn't like me. And Eddie Kingston, like all of a sudden, like cold shouldered me and made everything super uncomfortable. It was very, very weird. And that's just how it operates with those guys. I've seen it firsthand. It's not my vibe, right? I mean, but they all have each other's backs, I guess is a nice way to put it, right? If you mess with one, you mess with all kind of deal. So Colton on.
Some people call that blind loyalism.
I suppose. I watched in real time. That happened though, and I was just like, "Wow, that's so shitty." All right, well, I'm gonna go get a drink now, I guess.
Yeah, that's another reason to get another drink. That's something. Well, thank you for sharing that. That here on It's Just Wrestling.
I've wanted to tell that story, but I always forget to, or it doesn't come up. And this is the first time I was just like, "No, okay, I'll do it. Yeah, it's fine." Yeah, it happened. Listen, it's very, very weird.
If there are any other stories that pop up along the way, feel free. Yeah, this could be your.
That was before All Out, by the way, everybody. That was before all the chaos and everything. So whatever that was, there you go.
Is that like the only time that you've experienced something like that? Maybe not to you specifically, but have you kind of witnessed that thing, not just with Kingston, but with somebody else, where there's a warm kind of reception, and then out of nowhere there's like a little bit of whisper down the line, and then it pivots? Or I think wrestlers are odd. I guess that's my thing. Like they seem like very different creatures from pro athletes, right? Pro sports athletes, they do their thing. You're in the locker room with them. You can joke with them if you build up rapport. Otherwise, like, they kind of stay to themselves. It feels like from the outside, some wrestlers are just, and again, like maybe it's just blind loyalism. They travel together, do all this stuff together. They've gone through an interesting industry. Like, I don't know.
I will say The closest I can compare it to was I used to work for Billy Corgan here in Chicago. He had a company called Resistance Pro, and I worked for Billy for a couple of years. Actually, at one point, thought Billy and I had a very good relationship, but towards the end, some things happened. Relationship turned negative. And I did watch people turn on me. I mean, talk about blindly loyal. I mean, this is an independent pro wrestling company. You got Billy Corgan here. Nobody wants to upset with Billy Corgan. So once I found myself at odds with Billy, there were certainly some people that all of a sudden were no longer my friends. I mean, it's independent wrestling. It's not uncommon, I think, for this kind of politics stuff to happen. Again, it's not my vibe. I don't really like to participate in this, but in an industry where you're so dependent on word of mouth or knowing somebody to know somebody and nobody wanting to get upset with anything, once the crowd's against you in certain pockets, there's not much you can do, which is again why I think that they took a bad shot here against Punk. Like, I think they ran like an indie play. Like, I think this is how you run somebody out of an indie locker room. This is not how you run a multi-million-dollar draw out of a professional company. It becomes a mud show. This is a play this is like the Little Giants, the final play in Little Giants, but done by the Dallas Cowboys, right? Yep. It's not going to work. You can't do that many laterals.
I initially heard you it was Wrestling Friends, right, with Matt Kuhn, and I love him. He's been very outspoken about the fact that he thinks that the Bucks, there's a good chance he's week in and week out said that he thinks this time next year the Bucks are going to be in WWE.
Yeah,
the power play, and I think you're right. I do. Whether it was the Bucks themselves who orchestrated it or whatever, or if it was friends of theirs who, again, blind loyalism. Good friends, you're going to go to war for your friends. Can't fault it. That's the other thing. Like, that's the human element of this. Like, if somebody went after my friends, right, and I believe that my friends are totally in the right, I might try to help them out. That's just human nature. But in looking at it, that power play didn't work because Punk is here. Not only is Punk here, he has another show. Not only does he have another show, he has a show that we're waiting on the ratings to come out. But in that first week, on a Saturday night, drew about what Dynamite has been doing middle of the week. Mm-hmm. After people kind of poo-pooed the notion that you can get anywhere over 700,000 people to tune into a Saturday night show. Mm-hmm. He's got that. He's obviously got a good relationship with Warner Brothers. He dropped that line in the Collision promo. They clearly, Warner Brothers, Discovery clearly thinks that he's a star. The ratings back up, and the ticket numbers that have moved since he has returned have demonstrated that he has drawing power. If all of this has gone against you and the power play didn't work, whether it was you who orchestrated it or not, is there just a point here where the Young Bucks, I'm not sure about Omega, but is there a point where the Bucks just go, you know what, it's not worth it? Yeah, we put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into this, but like, it hasn't worked. He's still here. And if by the time they go to renegotiate a deal, he isn't gone or hasn't blown up, nothing's worked, do you think it's possible? Do you think it's probable that they walk away and go elsewhere?
Man, I think it's possible for sure. I have had other people much closer to the situation who tell me no way would the Bucks ever leave AEW. So I'm very betwixt because it was very similar arguments before Cody Rhodes left for WWE, where it's like, why would he ever do that? You are out of your mind. And it's like, well, I don't know. Money sure is cool, right? And like, yeah. He also sure did not seem particularly happy with the politics of the situation that were going on at AEW for him at the moment. What I find interesting, and look, I think time heals all wounds. I don't know that the Bucks and Kenny and Cody are like the best of friends, but Cody has certainly gone out of his way to try to prove me wrong. But I do think that part of the reason Cody left was because of a little bit of friction internally with the guys up top, similarly, not exactly the same to Punk, but similarly. And he left, and everybody's happier now, at least in that little pocket. So if the Bucks were to pick up and pull the same play that Cody did, it's just funny to me that they'd probably go to work with Cody, the guy who left arguably partially because of some of the politics that they created. It would be stunning, but I do not count it out. But especially with the whole evening the odds with the bloodline. But the reason that I've been told that the Bucks would not do it is because they're used to a schedule now that is just not the WWE schedule. They are used to not only that, there's certain accommodations that they can have. There's certain power. There's certain accoutrement, whatever you want to say. There's certain things, and look, they don't have to do a bunch of press. They don't have to worry about a bunch of stuff. They go to WWE, they're going to be traveling all the time. They're going to be expected to do press. They're going to have to do XX and X, and that's also hanging in it too. So, look, a lot hangs in the balance here. Could go either way, in my opinion. We'll see.
That schedule thing was what always, when there was the rumor about FTR, is FTR going to consider going back to WWE? I would listen to Dax's pod. And I was like, there's no way. I mean, I could be wrong. Maybe at some point there was like a good offer, but he would always talk about family being the most important thing, time with his daughter, time with his wife. And I'm like, there's no way if you're in that kind of position, if you're making good money to do what you do, to go on a nice run, to hold gold, all that, there's no way, especially with the young kid. I think his daughter's like 8 or 9 or something like that. Like I have an 8-year-old, right? I have 4 kids, but he's the oldest. But like the notion of going from one night a week or maybe now 2 nights a week, going out and performing and then having the freedom to go back home versus like being on the road. Was it like 200 something nights or 200 whatever days a year? Some people are working in WWE. Like that's insane.
Yeah.
Absolutely crazy.
And on top of the amount of days, if you look at the Young Bucks schedule, it is Wednesdays, middle of the week, most weekends off, very few weekends not off, right? So you can be around on weekends for recitals and soccer games and all of those things because, again, you're working on a weeknight by and large, right? They're not, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think the Bucks ever showed up on one of the house shows that AEW did, right?
I don't believe so.
They're not clamoring to get out there and work every night, buddy. So like
they're also not chilling. They're not taking like indie dates or anything like some other top talent have. Like Oxley did for a while. Like they're not popping up in GCW, right? Like they're
no, they're working Wednesdays, and because that was the big thing that I had heard when the collision announcement came bubbling up, and it wasn't official yet, but I had heard that they were talk about splitting up the roster. I know they're very much like we're not doing a hard split yet, but obviously there are some talents that are going to be on Saturdays and not on Wednesdays, and we'll see how that dynamic evolves over time. But some talents, they were like, hey, why do I have to be on Saturdays? Now I can't do indie bookings. Now I can't do Comic-Cons. I'm going to lose out on that percentage of my business because I got to go over here on the CM Punk show, and all the people that are on the Young Bucks show, they can all go do all that stuff. So there's all that kind of weird politics too.
That's a really good point. It's also incredibly childish to some extent, and these guys are reportedly making a lot of money to go do a thing. It's akin to, again, like I bring this back to sports so much, but like it's akin to complaining that you have to go to practice as a pro athlete. Like you're playing a kid's game. You're getting to live out a dream. You're one of X number of elite talent that get to do it. You're really going to complain about going to a shoot around one morning. Like it's silly.
I think that's maybe one of the reasons they backed off doing the hard roster split is I don't know that they wanted to tell anybody they weren't going to be on Wednesdays and they had to be on Saturdays. I think I don't know that they want to cross that line, at least not quite yet.
That's a really good point. I hadn't thought about it. That is a really, really good point. 2 things here before I let you go. One, I showed you the clip before, and I don't want to pull it up on the YouTube channel here because I don't want the takedown. I don't want to flag against the account. But at Forbidden Door, Will Osprey pulls off a move that's apparently called Tiger Driver 91 on Kenny Omega. When I watched it live on my couch, I watched it and I thought, holy shit, he was supposed to reattach. He was supposed to kind of like let him go grab and then drop. And it looked like he flipped Omega up with the arms pulled back, almost in like a pedigree, like another Tiger Driver, right? But dumps him on his head. And immediately I think, holy shit, like, are we going to see like a broken neck situation here? Like, are we going to see a stoppage? There's no way to brace. I saw people trying to say that like the way that Omega's arms go up and he kind of lands contacting with forearms, that's going to help. No, he's dumped on his head. And I thought, well, Osprey seems like a pretty like safe worker, all things considered, with all of the insane things that he can do in the ring. We find out after the fact, like that was a move. That is a move. It's a move that is very rarely done because of the high risk of peril, bodily harm. When you saw it, can you let everybody know what your reaction was?
Yeah, I mean, it looked brutal, right? I mean, it looked really, really, really super dangerous. The only thing that I can, because Kenny wasn't hurt by the move, right? It's just a super dangerous looking move, right?
Apparently not, but he was asked, Tony Khan was asked about it at the media scrum after the fact, about if there was an update on Omega, and he walked out with some help. But again, like, how much of that is real? How much of that is kayfabe? Like, no one really knows. He did continue the match. I mean, there was a lot of match to go after that. So presumably, he's not paralyzed. He has full use of all of his limbs.
The thing about the move that, because it's like you gotta be really, really specific when you're gonna drop that spot, because it didn't look to me necessarily like he dropped him on his head, as it much was like right where your traps meet at the back of your neck. Yeah. And I mean, we're talking centimeters of difference here, but when those guys, that whole bridge of your back across your triceps, across your shoulders there, like their bodies are conditioned to fall right there from a million different angles, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, that's the only reason Tyson Kidd can still walk. And so I looked at it, I was like, that looks really dangerous, but you could only do that if your muscles were developed in the way the pro wrestling muscles are, because he dropped him exactly where you would have to drop somebody doing that move for them to not die, which was right there, right where your shoulders attached at the top, just below your neck. So it was wild.
One thing that people can check out over on the It's Just Wrestling Twitter is, and I'll make sure that it's there when this goes up, but Crowbar, of all people, put out a tweet. He did a quote tweet of a move that was done to him when he was 19 years old by Scott Steiner. And it was, what the hell was it called? The Steiner driver, right?
The
Steiner screwdriver.
Screwdriver,
right?
Yeah.
Where he kind of flips him up, almost in like a body slam, kind of like reverse suplex, and then drops him down. They kind of like do a little jump and then land in a pile driver. And Crowbar said that he was a naive 19-year-old indie green guy, agreed to take the move, assuming that he wouldn't get hurt, and almost broke his neck. He says that the risk reward on this one is terrible. 49-year-old me wouldn't take it from Scott in his prime, lots of room for error. And then there's a lot of really good conversation in the replies. I'd encourage people to go check it out. Crowbar kind of going back and forth with people about taking those kinds of moves and all that. I look at it and I totally hear what you're saying. And again, Osprey seems to be like a safe worker. Omega, for the most part, seems to be a safe worker. Also, like, if I got dropped there, if you got dropped there, I think if most people got dropped there,
we'd be dead.
We're not doing this podcast right now. Right. Maybe it's a benefit of working on those muscle groups. But to me, I sit and I go, that's not worth it. That match was fantastic on its own. It didn't need that move. If that's going to end the match, that's a hell of a way to end it. But then for it to continue even more, I don't know. I don't think it's worth it.
Here, I'll put it.
It's okay.
I'll put it this way. I prefer that move to some of the stiff shots I see these guys like Daniel Bryan throwing around right now. Bryan Danielson. There's a certain kind of strong styles where you punch something, you make it look like you're working snug, like you're hitting somebody. You're not really actually hitting them. The whole I want to prove myself by actually beating the shit out of people thing, the trend going on right now, is really not my vibe. Like, I haven't watched the main event yet between Danielson and Okada. I am going to watch it here in just a couple hours here, but it did not shock me when I heard Danielson got injured. I'm like, of course he did. He gets injured every match. He injures somebody every match. He nearly killed MJF with that hematoma in the face, right? I was getting shades of Shibata looking at that guy's skull. Mm-hmm. It's not my jam. I think the whole style of AEW could be taken down a notch or two. And I think we're probably going to see that over in Collision based off of the guys that are running it, right? You can do a main event style that doesn't require moves like that. You can get the same reaction doing stuff that is not that. So that's just a bigger kind of thought on the current way that AEW talent's performing at the moment.
The crazy thing is, in that match and where he suffers the injury, it's Okada landing on him on the elbow drop, and Danielson didn't put his arm in a safe space, is what he said after the event. And that's what led to the fracture in his arm, which is, he said it's like one of those fluky things. You do all these other things, and that's like the thing that does it. I guess my only concern really is you think about like Mick Foley after the fact, years down the line, talking about how some of the innovation that he brought to hardcore wrestling and some of the risks that he took kind of inspired a generation of young performers to go out and try a lot of this stuff and really get hurt, not be able to do it safely. And that has been a criticism even of his career, is that it kind of opened the door for that sort of thing. And when I see that move, that Tiger Driver 91, I think about, maybe it's because I'm a dad, but I think about it and I go, imagine your kid doing that to their little brother. Or imagine you go to a local indie show at the Armory and somebody tries to pull that move off and it doesn't end the same way. That's where, to me, I go, it's not just the risk reward for those guys in the ring. It's how it can potentially influence other people down the line. I don't want to be counter. Like, it was a great match. I don't know. I looked at it, I'm like, maybe not.
Yeah, I don't know about the imitation argument. I think it's a fine argument, right? You don't want to do something, but I don't think you can stop people. Look, and this comes from me. The moves themselves, I don't really care about. I even watch deathmatch stuff. I worry more about the performers. I don't worry about anybody going home and throwing themselves through a light tube, right? The thing that scares me the most, and I got upset about a couple years with AEW, is when you show like Jake Roberts smoking cigarettes and acting like a badass all the time. That'll kill you. That'll get a kid hooked for life. That'll kill him in the long run. So the moves and stuff, I don't really know how many people are actually going out and trying to hit Tiger Driver 91s on their brothers and things like that. So I take that one with a little bit more grain of salt, personally.
All right, before we go, let people know what's going on with Haus of Wrestling. I have to say, like, the initial reason that I reached out to you was I saw the way that you were covering things and the way that your site was covering things. And I said, wow, this doesn't look like sensationalized bullshit. This just looks like somebody who's trying to present a level-headed, bit of news, a level-headed way to cover the wacky industry of pro wrestling. So I know that you were with Wrestling Inc. at one point. Now you're out on your own doing Haus of Wrestling. Where did the inspiration come from, and how has it gone so far? Like, what's your macro view of how things have gone?
I think it's been going great. We're definitely seeing, week over week increases in numbers from podcasting to site traffic. I appreciate the kind words you say about the way we cover the news. We try to mix in the top aggregate with some exclusive stuff of our own, from news to interview content. And I honestly, like, towards the end of last year, I was just starting to burn out a little bit. Needed to take some time off at the top of the year. That's when I walked away from Wrestling Inc. I wasn't really sure, or parted ways with Wrestling Inc. And I wasn't really sure what I was going to do, but I had too many people that were telling me, you got to do your own thing. So after all those people told me that, and then my wife said, you got to do your own thing. And then once she said, you got to do it, then, that's the only person that matters. So once I had her support and in my corner, it was just, talking to my friend who's a web designer and talking to my friend who's a graphics designer and just starting to put the pieces together. And I've been very happy with it all. I've been very happy with the reception. Everybody's been super positive for the most part about everything. And it's pro wrestling. You can't make everybody.
That's right. You can't.
People are not going to be happy all the time. But whatever. By and large, very, very happy, very, very positive. And yeah, it's Haus, Haus of Wrestling.com. If you guys want to check it out, we also have a podcast feed under the same name.
Fantastic. I appreciate you coming on today. Appreciate you, sharing a generous portion of your day to talk about this. I know you're heading out not too long from now. Are you going to be going to All In August? Is that on the docket? Or?
I don't know if I'll be at All In August at Wembley. I'm thinking about it. I will definitely be at All Out in September. Knock on wood, here in Chicago. As everybody has seen me in the scrums for many years now, I was exceptionally active. I got married in October. So I'm trying to take this year to slow down a little bit, spend a little bit more time with my wife here while I'm still a young man, enjoy the flowers and all that. And then next year, I think you're going to see me a lot more active in the scrums and stuff again. So we'll see, maybe 50-50 on All In. We'll see.
Sounds good. Well, I appreciate you coming on. Let people know where they can find you on social media.
Sure. I'm at Nick_Hausman at Wrestling Haus over on Twitter as well. And you can find Haus Wrestling on all the social media platforms. Tuesday, Thursdays, premier streaming network for Haus of Wrestling. And then once a week, Inside the Ropes, I do an exclusive interview over there. And keep your eyes peeled, hoping to have some very cool Inside the Ropes news for everybody here in the not too distant future. So there you go.
Fantastic. I hope everybody out there enjoyed this episode of It's Just Wrestling. We'll be back We'll be back a little bit later this week to do a deeper dive into Forbidden Door, how we got in there, the show itself, and coming back out. So keep an eye on the YouTube channel. And then, of course, you can find the show wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Amazon Music, Pandora, wherever you get your podcasts. And find us all over social media. You can see it down. If you're watching on the YouTube stream, you can find it down below, or on YouTube at It's Just Wrestling Pod, Facebook at It's Just Wrestling Pod, TikTok at It's Just Wrestling Pod, Twitter at It's Just Wrestling, no you and just. I don't like that Twitter limits your handles, but they do. And on Instagram at It's Just Wrestling. By the way, the site, finally working on a site. It's quasi-functional at this point. It doesn't look horrific. So you can go to itsjustwrestling.com. Going to start working on some stuff. Start putting some stuff out there. Hopefully do a little bit of level-headed stuff, just like Nick. None of the sensationalist garbage. Remember, no matter how upset you get, no matter how emotionally invested you are, just remember, take a deep breath. It's just wrestling. Have a great week, everybody. Talk to you soon.